Hi, you're watching Bread and Roses, a weekly political social magazine on New Channel TV that's broadcast both in English and Farsi. I'm Maryam Namazie.
And I'm Fariborz Pooya. In this week's program, we'll be discussing the massacre at Charlie Hebdo and why we think criticizing religion is such an important right and a necessity. We will also interview Bahram Soroush, a political analyst, on this issue.
In the shocking news of the week, we'll be talking about the wonderful Saudi freethinker who was flogged on Friday in Saudi Arabia. We'll also be discussing the insane fatwa of the week, which is from Turkey, and about how tattoos are so terrible. You need to either repent or remove. The massacre of 12 at French publication Charlie Hebdo by Islamists has been strongly condemned. Some, however, see the attack as a consequence of the publication's provocative cartoons on Islam and Mohammed. In fact, Charlie has criticized all religions and all those in positions of power. Why should Islam have special privileges? And do secularists and unbelievers not deserve the same freedom of expression as believers? In the name of respect of religions, Islamists and the religious right have been given center stage at the expense of free expression, which without the right to criticize religion is meaningless. In the era of ISIS, this criticism is needed more than ever. When we're looking at the question of what happened with Charlie Hebdo, I think the main key point is that this has nothing to do with Muslims, it has nothing to do with immigration. This has to do with a far-right political movement that wants to use any excuse and means possible in order to impose its reactionary values and in order to gain access and influence.
I agree. People in Iran who are imprisoned because of blasphemy laws. Mr. Badawi, who was apparently flogged today a couple of days ago in Saudi Arabia, he hasn't done anything wrong, and the Islamists don't need an excuse. Daesh and ISIS in Syria and Iraq, this is exactly what they're doing over there. They don't need any excuses, and that's what's happening. They're extending trying to extend the influence in Europe, and we need to stop that.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, what have the school children done in Peshawar? What has the woman done who has acid thrown in her face? So if we start to use as the basis what Islamists want and what provokes them and what upsets them, we will no longer be able to do anything in society.
And I think people should stop pretending the reasons for this, as in trying to justify it. There is no reason, there is no justification for this. It's pure criminality, and it needs to stop, and we need to oppose it. And I think people across the world brilliantly have come out in support of this, and we've seen that magnificent and beautiful solidarity exist.
I mean, the reality is that when we're talking about free expression, the criticism of religion is very key there, because freedom of expression doesn't matter unless you're dealing with things that are sacred, things that are taboo, and that's how society has changed over time.
And I agree. I think today freedom of expression, it means freedom to criticize religion without criticizing religion, and the right to unconditionally criticize religion. Freedom of expression won't exist.
And actually, I think more over and above the right to criticize religion is the right to criticize Islam, because Charlie Hebdo has criticized all religions equally. It has criticized all aspects, from the far right to the two political personalities in France. What is the sensitivity on Islam? And that's what needs, and that's why it's so important to actually be able to criticize Islam.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is because Islamist group and political Islamic movement, or Islamist group as everybody recognize them, they're very aggressive people. They can't accept this right, and we've seen that in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, North Africa. They massacre people for the slightest expression of the basic human rights.
And I think one of the things that we must say is that criticizing Islam, criticizing an idea, criticizing a religion is not racism. And this is key. There is racism and bigotry against Muslims, against immigrants, for sure, and we have to unequivocally stand up against that. But that won't stop by silencing criticism against Islam.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of this fight against Islamists, against the suppression of the fundamental human rights, is actually to be very clear that the racist and racism and anti-immigrant policies and parties have no right actually to that, because they're doing exactly the same thing. They're feeding from each other. The Islamists and the racists, they're feeding from each other, and we should not allow this sort of ding-dong between these two to sort of cover the space and public space.
I mean, some will say that, excuse me, some will say that we should respect people's beliefs, we shouldn't offend, we shouldn't provoke. But the fact of the matter is that we all have different things that offend us, that provoke us, and that cannot be a reason to limit freedom of expression.
Or not a reason to go around and shooting people dead.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, let's now go to listen to the interview with political analyst Bahram Soroush, and we'll be back to respond to some of the questions you had asked us earlier via Twitter and Facebook. Hello, Bahram Surosh, and welcome back to our program. We've missed you a great deal.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to speak to you about the brutal attack against the French publication Charlie Hebdo. We've heard a lot of talk about why this has happened. Everything from Muslim immigration in Europe to the ghettoization of Muslims in France to, of course, the issue of Islam itself. What is the reason behind this attack, the crux of the matter? What's the crux?
Well, when you look at it on its own, it's part of the Islamists' attack on anyone or any newspaper, any organization attacking Islam or saying that they don't agree with it, that they want to criticize it. And so it was part of this movement which we see around the world, in Europe, all the terrorist attacks against free thinkers, anyone, like especially the cartoonists, we remember in Denmark. And also in the case of Charlie Hebdo, they had already firebombed their offices before, as you know. But when you ask about the reasons, if we look at the greater context for the rise of this Islamism in itself, which is not just in Europe itself, but it is around the world in countries like Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. We have the ISIL, and we have Al-Qaeda and all these terrorist organizations. But what if we concentrate on what has happened in the West, especially during the past couple of decades, for example, the policies of the Western governments has been one of appeasement of Islam and Islamism. For example, with the building of the faith schools, allowing the flourishing of these mosques, and respecting, all these religious organizations in the name of cultural relativism, and boxing people into ethnic and religious identities. I think if you look at the context, you can see the reason for the rise of these Islamist forces, and especially in the case of the attackers against the Charlie Hebdo. They were born in France. They are the next generation, and that's homegrown terrorism.
But there's nothing wrong with mosques. I mean, people have a right to their religion, and it's not about the Muslim population per se. When you talk about Islamism, what are you talking about exactly?
Well, Islamism is a movement in itself. Obviously, we're not talking about just ordinary Muslims, and everybody should have, of course, the right to believe in whatever they like. And freedom of expression, of course, includes people to believe in whatever belief systems that they want to believe in. But more important, it also encompasses, and that's very important, of the right to not to believe in religion. Okay? Because religion has, throughout, in centuries, has always been part of the establishment, has always been supported. So the movement for civil rights and freedom of expression was specifically against the interference of religion in state affairs, in the rights of individuals. So the differentiation is there, it's very obvious. And I think those people who want to justify the attacks like the one on Charlie Hebdo, they mix up these two. They want to say, oh, why are you attacking Muslims? That's not a question of that. It is attacking a very reactionary, movement which very intolerant. It doesn't accept any criticism of its ideology. It is also a political movement which has a state power in certain parts of the world, and like in the form of ISIL, for example, ISIS, or whatever you want to call it, Islamic State. It has captured territories, and so if you see it in that context, you can see that we are dealing with a very pernicious movement, which, in the name of using Islam, and they are believers as well, they want to terrorize the population.
But some would say that you talked about how religion has always been part of the political structure, the political power structure. Some will say, well, Islam is a minority religion in Europe, and therefore any criticism of Islam is racialized, and therefore it does equate to racial attacks against Muslims.
I don't believe it is racialized at all. I think, again, it is a part of the confusion they want to create in order to attack any criticism or fend off any criticism of them and their religion by calling it racist, because they know how people are sensitive about that. It's not racism doesn't include a critique of an idea, of an ideology. And because in this specific case, we're not even talking about Muslims. We're talking about a religion, an ideology, which everybody has the right to criticize it, and to say that they don't agree with it, to ridicule it, to mock at it, and do whatever they want to do. And it's completely, the question is the other way around. If it was people who don't, the argument they use is that I am offended, but I, as an atheist, may be offended by seeing a mosque, maybe seeing an article in a newspaper about a religious article, or a priest on the street, but that doesn't mean that they should not be allowed to. And I don't feel that being offended gives me the right to ask for them to be gagged. So they turn the question upside down in order to justify their attacks.
I mean, one of the two things come to mind now in the things you're saying. One is the fact that it seems that the right for atheists and secularists and unbelievers to criticize religion is not the same as it is for believers to criticize disbelief, so there's this inequality there. And also there's the issue of provocation. People will say the violence is unacceptable, but many people will say that Charlie Hebdo provoked and maybe deserved what it got.
Okay, there are a couple of questions here. One is the question of respect. I think it has become very usual or accepted to say, but you should respect religion. And it seems to be part of sort of received wisdom in society that, okay, you should respect religion. I don't think that's right. I don't think that religion should have a privileged status. It has had a privileged status, still has, but it is like any other ideology. It is something individuals have chosen to have. And so, like any other ideology, it should be open to scrutiny, it should be open to criticism, like anything else. And so for people to say, I don't respect Islam, I don't respect Christianity, I don't respect religion, that's absolutely their right. And it is their absolute right, and nobody can deny them that. The other issue about, you mentioned about the provocation. Again, that is a sort of excuse that is used. I think the freedom of expression should be unconditional. It is different from slander or libel, for example, these are the legal terms for example, to accuse somebody of having done something which may turn out to be untrue. But provoking is very subjective. It may be the person who feels provoked. Okay, if they might feel offended, they may feel provoked. I mean, for example, in rape cases, it used to be thrown as a defense to say that the woman had provoked the man. Yeah, you can see the analogy there, and that is never accepted, because that action in itself of somebody's attacking, firebombing somewhere and calling for them to be gagged and not to be allowed to speak their mind in the name of provocation is just an excuse in order to, it's like scaremongering in order to stop that criticism.
On the issue of excuse, I mean, I think, a lot of people will look at this situation and say the cartoons are at fault. But the reality is that this movement doesn't need excuses. I mean, what was the excuse behind attacking a school in Peshawar, or all these other apostates and blasphemers who are to be hanged in Saudi Arabia and Iran and so on and so forth? So in a sense, as you say, it is an excuse.
Yeah, because that gives them the context in which to justify what they are doing. Although even those excuses are not justifications at all. They're so absurd. And although we should remember that some people give in to that. Some people say, for example, I was watching an interview recently, and just after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and somebody, a Muslim cartoonist, was saying, oh, the British media have been very good. They have never insulted Islam. What's that? And I think that shows that we still have a long way to go to say that freedom of expression should be unconditional. And that's the whole point of it. And if it doesn't include criticism of religion, of any ideology, anything that you don't agree with, is meaningless. What's the point of having unconditional freedom of expression?
And why is, as a final question, the right to criticize religion so key in a defense of free expression? The right to provoke, the right to offend?
Yeah, I think especially now it has become important because we are facing not secularization of society, but religionization of society. We are seeing the inroad of religion into civil society, which we thought decades ago that it was a battle we had won, that separation of religion from state, secularism, laïcité, as the French would call it, it was something that people had achieved. But we are seeing now that is under attack. And that force, which is quite powerful, very well financed, and very pernicious and aggressive and violent, that is threatening this fundamental right to a civil, secular, laïc society. And that is why it is important to include religion, especially and critique of religion in the concept of unconditional freedom of expression.
Thank you, Bahram.
Thank you.
You enjoyed that interview. Let's go to a couple of questions and respond to that. One is on the issue of whether there is something inherently, terroristic and bad about Islam as opposed to other religions which causes these sort of attacks. What would you say?
I think inherently all religions are reactionary. All religions do not want freedom of expression. They want the views to be respected, and they want a no-go area. And all of them actually have element of blasphemy in the laws and regulation they have. The difference is that Islam, other ones have been reined in, but Islam hasn't been reined in. And I think that's the time. This is the right time for human society in the 21st century to say, no, that's not right. And people have right across the world, have universal right to criticize religion, and particularly Islam.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that particularly Islam might seem worse only because of this political Islamic movement. And if it's reined in, then people can criticize Islam as they do Christianity in Europe without having their head chopped off or being shot at. The other issue that's often raised, and some of the questions that were raised by our viewers, is the fact that, well, isn't there something wrong with Muslims? Because Muslims, after all, believe in Islam, and Islam says that those who blaspheme should be killed. And I suppose my response to that is that, you should never look at Muslims as one homogeneous group in the same way that the English are not one homogeneous group, Iranians are not, Christians are not. There are people on the Christian right that think gay people cause earthquakes in this world, and there are others who are pro-choice and pro-women's rights and pro-gay marriage. So there are a myriad of different types of opinions among Christians. There are among Muslims as well. Plus, not everybody is Muslim.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more a person believes in the religious idea, there is more wrong thing with those ideas, not necessarily with individuals. And the millions of people who are labelled as Muslims across the world, they live a normal life. They have belief in religion. They don't necessarily go out and practice it. They don't go out and shoot people. They don't believe actually in shooting people, because that's how people are.
I think it's important to make that distinction between Muslims as individual believers, yes, and Islamism as a far-right political movement. It's the distinction we make between the English Defence League or the National Front in France versus a Parisian and a Londoner.
Absolutely, and I think there is an element that links the Islamist and the Islamic ideology. That's true. Islam in itself is the banner of the Islamist and ISIS and Islamic regime of Iran and Saudi Arabian government. That's true, and that needs to be criticised, and governments and states and these groups need to be confronted.
But if political power is taken out of the hands of this political movement, then the Quran will be a book like any other book, where
Absolutely.
people can pick and choose what they want.
So the more political influence you give these groups, the organised religious groups, the more problem we're going to have. So I think religious groups really shouldn't have any political influence in society. The institution needs to be controlled, and that's the way to deal with it.
I think one of the questions someone asked is, well, what can be done about it? And I think as a sum up to this discussion, we can say that, one, we have to stop anti-immigrant sentiments. We have to stop anti-Muslim bigotry. We must deal with Islamism as a political movement, mass mobilize against it, but also defend the right to criticize religion, which is a banner of the religious right.
And I think the key issue is that the less influence they have, you can't start discussing this if you constantly feed the religious schools. Stop the religious school, shut down the religious school, do not fund religious institutions. I can't see why a state should be funding religious institutions. And you see that in Britain, for example, is happening. That's the solution. Stop those fundings, stop those support, and you'll see, create a space for people to develop.
On 9th January, Raif Badawi, who is a free-thinking Saudi blogger and writer, he was given 50 of his 1,000 lashes. And he's basically going to be given 50 lashes every Friday after Friday prayers. And the order is that he should be severely lashed until the 1,000 lashes are carried out. He's also been sentenced to 10 years in prison. I heard today that when he was getting ready to be lashed, he raised his hand and gave a victory sign. And all I can say really is, long live Raif Badawi, long live people like him who are standing up to, the sort of
resistance.
They are the resistance, the resistance on the front lines.
Charlie Hebdo, resistance in Iran against Islamists. Raif Badawi, these are the same thing and need to be supported. So when we are defending Charlie Hebdo's right to criticise, we are actually defending Raif Badawi. ISIS, Islamic regime of Iran,
Saudi government
are of the same ilk,
yeah, and
they need to be opposed exactly the same thing. And I think it's disgusting that governments, European governments and Western governments although they've mentioned it, they've sort of had a discussion, they actually are not severely putting pressure on the Saudi government.
It is an utter outrage that the European governments have business dealings, wheelings and dealings with the Saudi government while they dare to hold someone like Raif Badawi. So I think we need to keep the pressure on and make sure that all these floggings don't take place, because it is tantamount to torture and it can kill someone.
Absolutely. Imagine if the French government were dealing and wheeling and having business dealing with these two criminals who were shot dead, while they were actually killing and massacring Charlie Hebdo's.
It's exactly
exactly saying what's going on, and I think the world should be outraged.
And if you, I mean, one of the things I said on Twitter is if you say Je suis Charlie, if you say I am Charlie, you should also be saying I am Raif, I am, Sohail Arabi, who's facing execution in Iran, also for so-called insulting the Prophet. Roya Nobacht, who is in prison for 20 years for criticizing Islam on Facebook, and all of these people.
And this week's fatwa comes from Turkey. The top religious organization has declared that you are not allowed to have tattoos. If you have tattoo, you have to remove it surgically, clinically, surgically, you've got to remove it, or repent. And if you can't remove it, you have to repent. That's interesting sort of news, and insane and crazy fatwa coming out of Turkey.
It's really amazing how they are so concerned about every intricate thing that you do personally. You know, what you wear, what tattoo you have on you, what you eat, who you have sex with. And then there are massacres taking place, and of course they've got justifications from that, from US militarism to ghettoization of immigrants in Europe.
No, absolutely, and there's always a reason for that. I think, as one of our colleagues said, it's all controlled. It's just about anything that controls women in particular, young people, because young people want change in society, and they've got very energetic, trying to control those. And I mean, this is crazy. It's unstoppable fatwa crazy factory in the Islamists. I think that's what it is. Yes.
And here they've got a whole declaration on it, which they say our Prophet has said Allah has cursed the people who change their shape created by God, such as the woman who tattoos on someone else or has a tattoo done, or who removes hair from their face or eyebrows, or those who remove their teeth or make themselves thinner.
I think they have a contract with the the surgically removing sort of tattoo parlors to actually remove those things. I think there must be a business behind it, apart from controlling society. But anyhow, it's the crazy fatwa machine.
But also, it's funny because the President Erdogan, he actually told off a youth, an 18-year-old who had a tattoo on, and he had said, don't be fooled by the foreigners, because obviously anyone who has a tattoo has been duped by some CIA, Mossad foreign agent.
Yes, there's that sort of, and it's interesting that this is the president of Turkey.
Yeah.
I think he shaves, doesn't he? Okay, so he is in trouble. He needs to go and repent. Okay. Okay, that brings us to the end of the program today. Please do write to us. We'd like to hear your views. We see this as your own program, and you can air your voice here, and we'll try to respond to your questions. You could send us short video clips, and we try to show those on our program.
This is our first program since the new year, so we also want to wish you a Happy New Year. And we hope you enjoyed the program, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye.
And goodbye from me.